Welcome to the first episode of Call of the Father. This has been coming for a long time. It's kind of hard to get going, but I'm just going to start talking, and I'm going to start with a story. Oh, and before I get started on that, I want to say that I'm going to do this anonymously for several reasons. One's for my own well-being. I just feel like if too much attention comes on me, it affects me in the wrong way, and I don't want that. And the other reason is sometimes I see people giving too much attention to somebody who speaks or has knowledge, and it affects the people giving the attention too much. They start to worship that person in some weird way. I don't want that either. Anyway, I have a message to give. Felt called to do this for a long time, and I feel it's a calling from God. It's real heavy on my heart, and I have stories to tell. So this podcast is going to be about healing. It's directed, really, I think the target is fathers, and I grew up with a dysfunctional family dynamic, and I've learned later in life how badly that affected me and my relationships in life. Even with my kids, I think that I'm a pretty good dad, but I've learned some things along the way where I wasn't perfect, and I wish I could have done better. But I want to break cycles of generational trauma, and I want to help others to see the light and break those generational cycles as well. So I'm going to start with a story. Basically, this started for me about 4.5 years ago when I started to go through a divorce. So before the divorce really started, it was pretty hard. I was at a spot in my marriage where I wasn't very happy, and my ex, I started to notice a lot of signs of a drinking problem. She'd black out and not remember things, and there were some things that were really hurtful in that, and I started to become unamused by that, where probably there were red flags all along that I could have, should have seen, but I didn't know how. I didn't have the tools to see those things. And anyway, then as time went on, things started coming to a head in that, and eventually, as it broke up, it was pretty devastating. There was an affair involved, and I was pretty crushed, and I was left with my thoughts and my feelings, which I'd never learned to feel my feelings growing up, because with my childhood, my dad basically taught me that showing your emotions is a sign of weakness, and anytime I would feel strong feelings or start to feel a little emotional or even mention anything, I know one thing that I'd heard over and over was get over it, and that was a common thing. But the things that went into that go way back further than that, and I'll go into it in a minute. In the divorce, or when everything broke up, I knew as soon as I knew there was an affair, I was not going to continue that relationship, but it was still really devastating, and I started to focus on myself just before I knew about the affair. I was like trying to connect with God spiritually and just know that I was doing what I could about me, because I can't control everything. And when I started focusing on me, I liked how it felt, and there were a few weeks there, and then I found out about the affair, and that was a big slap in the face. But I feel like in that time, that time with myself and God prepared me for that. And when it hit me, I said to myself, okay, I like the changes I've been making, and I want to keep these. And then I kind of made a 3-part mission statement immediately. It just flowed. I didn't think too hard about this. It just came out. And I said to myself, I want to walk through this with my integrity intact. That was part 1. I don't want to be bitter, and that was part 2. And I want to learn, heal, and grow from this. And that was part 3. 3 things, but I consider that 1. Learning, healing, and growing, they kind of all go together. As things went on, it was interesting. I did heal. I'm not done healing. I don't think we're ever completely done healing from things, but you just keep working. You just keep learning. That's this human experience. And as I worked on things, I just saw how God really put resources in my life. I found things that helped me to do that healing and achieve the things that I wanted, and even just honor the mission statement that I made in a lot of ways. And then in some ways, I also realized later the fallacies in the mission statement. There were some points of, I don't know, I guess I could say arrogance. I thought I was going to walk through it with my quote unquote integrity intact. Integrity isn't always what you think, and it definitely wasn't what I thought at the beginning of that. I thought she was wrong, she had an affair, and I didn't have an affair, and I'm going to try to do everything that I can see right, and that's integrity. Well, I was kind of leaning my integrity on being right, and I don't really believe that that's integrity anymore. There were things that I did do wrong along the way, and ultimately, the biggest thing was I learned where what I thought was integrity all along was not integrity. I found one resource I found was Lisa A. Romano, and she is just a ninja spiritual gangster at delineating what spiritual growth is, what childhood trauma is. I've taken all three of her courses, and it's been life-changing. What I thought was integrity in the beginning, like just doing things for other people. I learned I was codependent, and I kind of learned that from some of her teaching. In the beginning, I was learning what a narcissist is because somebody brought up that my ex was a narcissist. And I didn't know anything about it. Started looking into it, doing a lot of deep diving. That's what led me to Lisa Romano. She does some teaching on narcissistic abuse, but it also leads into codependency, and she's very transparent about how she was codependent and how she healed from that. And through her teaching, there were some things along the way in podcasts and different things, and they were a big slap in the face. Covert contracts, oh my gosh. When I heard that one, I was like, holy shit, I do that. And I realized that my integrity isn't always as pure as advertised. There's just things that a codependent person will do, trying to seek validation, get their needs met, things that weren't met as a child. So this is going to be the first podcast, and it's a Valentine message. This is something that's very dear to me. It's a spiritual coincidence, if you will, but there are no coincidences. I never believed in Valentine's Day. It's never been significant to me in my life, but I'm going to tell a story about it. As I healed from the divorce and really started to look at myself, why did I get into that situation? Why did I attract that kind of a person? And why was I attracted to that kind of person? Why do I keep attracting these types of relationships? I started looking back, and I could see it over and over. I was like, okay, well, I'm the common denominator here. So as I did that, it started bringing me back to some things in my childhood. And I had a couple really spiritual experiences just praying and spending personal time meditating, where it led me back to some childhood trauma. And I felt like God led me right to the things that other people say I'd never heard of. In the beginning of this, I'd never heard of childhood trauma or inner child work. I've heard somebody say they're inner child, and I thought it was just a cute thing they were saying, like there's still a child inside. But as I really dug into it later, I realized like I had a really intense experience at the beginning of the divorce where I was driving home one day and I was pretty lost, felt like a shell of myself. And as I started thinking, driving home, I started to envision myself as a little kid. And keep in mind, at this time, I had never heard any of this. And I started to envision myself as a little boy, and I started to feel what he felt. That he never felt heard, validated, loved, connected to. He felt invisible. And I felt really sad, and I just wanted to hug that little boy. And on the way home that day, I just fell apart. It was a really hard emotional experience. Anyway, then as time went on, so as time went on after I was healing from the divorce, other things came up that started bringing up my childhood trauma that I never realized was there before. I didn't think that it was that bad, but that's what a narcissistic parent will lead you to believe, or narcissistic person in general will lead you to believe that what you're experiencing is normal, make you question your reality. And as I started to look back at my childhood, I started to realize my dad, there were some things there that I'd always sought his validation, and he always withheld it. He's always very critical. There were a lot of things there, but one of my two earliest childhood memories, I'm just going to go to the second one. The earliest one, it's a pretty traumatic experience, but the second one I can never remember was really traumatic. I was about 3 years old, and my dad had gotten these ducklings. He had little tiny ducklings, and he was keeping them in this fireplace. The fireplace was all cleaned out, and there was a surround, one of those screens around the fireplace, and that's where he had them. And we had this dog. This dog was very special to me. His name was Zeke. He was a German Shepherd, and he'd always been really protective of me. And there was a real connection there. He was my first dog. I think at one point my dad had let me pet the ducklings, and then one day I'm looking through this screen, and I just wanted to hold the ducklings, and I pulled the screen away, and Zeke pushed his way. I was powerless. Like, my head came up to the top of his back, and he pushed his way between me and the ducklings. I could see nothing. I'm pulling on his back. I can remember my little boy voice saying, "No, Zeke, no, no, Zeke," and trying to pull him back. He probably didn't even feel me. When the dog backed out of there, there wasn't a feather in sight. He'd eaten, swallowed them all. They were gone. And that's in itself is really, really devastating for a 3-year-old. It was hard to comprehend that he'd eaten them. They were gone. And my dad was not home. I remember my mom, who, keep in mind, I never felt protected by her. There was a lot of abandonment in my childhood with her. And basically, she just told me that when my dad got home, I was going to be in big trouble. He was going to be really mad. And I'd seen my dad mad, and that was a big fear. And I'm devastated over ducklings. I'm in fear of my dad coming home. And the next thing I remember is just my dad being there, knelt down in front of the fireplace, in my face, holding my shoulders, facing him. And he's yelling at the top of his lungs, "Where are the ducklings?" And I'm just crying. Like, it was it was terrible. And eventually he just kept saying that, yelling that. And I was like, in Zeke. And I just wanted it to end. And eventually he turned me over his knee and paddled my butt. And I think that the spanking was welcome compared to the yelling. And that's one of my earliest childhood memories. That one I had never felt any emotion over. My whole growing up, I never felt any emotion over that. I remembered it. Oh, and there's more to the story. After that, I never saw my dog again. My dad took the dog out in the woods and killed it, and I never saw that dog again. As I grew up, there was more things like that, but I never felt any emotion over that experience. As I was healing from the divorce and other things, there was my earliest childhood memory. There was something that happened real spiritual that I felt healing over, something that just divine that happened one day when I was meditating, and it was really healing, where I went back and basically was able to be the parent and myself, and in being the parent, being my dad in that situation, I relived the situation, and I was him the way that I would be with my kids, loving, nurturing, and not abusive. And anyway, but this experience, I never could even, I tried to do that same experience and I couldn't do it. Nothing ever came up. And then when I took Lisa Romano's 12-week breakthrough course, I'd been having this anxiety for a while. Like there wasn't any. And then as I was healing all of the trauma from childhood, or trying to focus on it, at least I could say, I started to develop this anxiety where I couldn't deal with it. And I'm missing a part. I'm going to go back. There was one day, as I realized that all of this stuff with my dad was a problem in my programming and the way that I grew up and how I showed up in relationships, it started to bother me a lot. And I knew at one point that my whole life seeking his validation, him withholding, then me being angry, it was just a toxic cycle, and that I needed to confront this with him, and I needed to do it for myself. And I had no idea, and I was growing anxiety over that at that time, and I didn't know how I was going to deal with that. And then one day I was just spending time with God, praying, and I realized it had been about a month and a half, 2 months, and I hadn't talked to him in a bit. And as I was sitting there praying, I was like, God, I don't know how to deal with this. I feel like this needs to happen. This conversation needs to happen. I have no idea what to say. I've been trying to think of what to say. And I just prayed, God, just have him call me and give me the words. And then when I looked down at my phone, I had missed a call from him. And I was like, wow. So I called him back. And the words that flew out of my mouth, I couldn't have planned, and I didn't even understand the significance of them at that time. But the significance would come up later, and it was very relevant and interesting to me. But one of the things that I said to him was that, he'd used a verse against me a lot in my childhood. It was always about pleasing him, doing what he thinks I should do, and nothing was ever good enough. And one of the verses he constantly used from the Bible was about children, obey your parents. It's children, honor your parents. And when he said children, honor your parents, he forgot, and I told him this, you forgot that the verse after that says, fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath. And I said, you've done that a lot in my life. I've felt it a lot, and there were even times when I just wanted to pummel you into the ground. I was so angry toward you. And I told him also that I feel honoring your parents means a very different thing. And I have older stepkids that I've raised, and I'm so proud of them. I have 3 younger ones that they're still in the house, and I'm very proud of them as well. But I kind of meant this toward the older ones because they were grown. I said, I feel that my children have honored me in the greatest ways possible because I tried to raise them, and I didn't do perfect, but I tried to raise them to be productive members of society, have good hearts, be caring, compassionate, loving people who are able to look at themselves, all of those things. And I feel like they've honored me in that way. They don't always make the decisions that I want them to make. They make their own decisions, and to me that is beyond honoring, because they live with the consequences, good or bad, and I'm their friend now. I'm not their parent. I'm not telling them what to do, and in my mind and heart, that's just very honoring. And then the next thing I told him was that he'd held a piece of me. I said, "You've held a piece of me my whole life. And it's a piece that I should have never, as I became an adult, you had no business holding, but I didn't know better, so I let you have it. And I continued to seek your validation and your approval and different things. And you continued to hold this piece, and you enjoyed it, and you enjoyed the power." And I said, "Well, you can't have it anymore. I'm coming for it." And I don't remember the end of the conversation, but that was it. Like, I got off the phone, and that was the last time I ever talked to my dad. And it's been 3 years. It's been 3 years now, and it just so happened, I didn't even think about it at the time. It just felt like coincidence, but that was Valentine's Day. After that, I was doing pretty good for a little while, and then I started to have these feelings of anxiety. Felt like I couldn't get a deep enough breath, and I felt like there was something I was missing that I needed to deal with. I didn't know what it was. I was really looking within, trying to heal everything, and willing to look at myself. But I couldn't pinpoint what this was, and that's when I decided to take that 12-week breakthrough course with Lisa Romano, and I felt like I really knew it would come out then. And as I went through the course, it was amazing, and there were meditations and journaling prompts. I love the journaling. And one night, it was about week 10, I believe, I was listening to the meditation for the week, and as I laid down, it felt like I went into a subconscious state. I don't feel like I was fully asleep. It was just half conscious. And all of a sudden, I went back to the night of that duckling incident. And through this course, like, you're doing things, you're getting pictures of yourself when you were little out, and you're through this course, there were times when some of the homework was to get pictures of yourself out when you were little and put them out and just honor those things, those pictures of yourself, your little self, and connecting with your inner child. My whole life, I carried shame, and this came from the programming from my dad. There's no question. And abandonment from my mom. They were both narcissists. And it was kind of a weird dynamic. My dad was an overt narcissist. My mom was a covert narcissist. Anyway, I always felt shame. When I saw pictures of myself as a little kid my whole life, there was always this feeling of shame. I didn't like the looks of it. I was just ashamed of him. And through this course, that started to go away. And this night when I did this meditation, I went back to that night, and it was crazy. It was like all of a sudden I was there, but I'm me now. And in my heart and mind, I knew that this abuse had already happened. In that night, I showed up back there, and I'm looking for little me. And I'm like, where is he? I want him. He's mine. And I felt like I'm there to get him. He's mine. He's mine. But I also, the overwhelming emotion was I wanted to comfort him. I wanted to comfort the little me. Nobody from that point, I felt like something was taken from me that night. a piece of me died, and I think it was my esteem, any chance of esteem that I ever had after that until now. Now I'm learning to heal. I wanted to comfort him. I wanted to hug him. And it was like he wasn't there. He was nowhere to be found. And I woke up in a panic. And I just cried and cried. I couldn't. It was really devastating. Just thinking about what that little boy went through. And that was the first time I ever felt emotion over that experience. And for the next 2 or 3 days, I just cried about it. Like I just released emotions, and that was a good thing. It was a really good thing. Anyway, a lot has happened since then, and as I thought about what happened, I was like, man, that was me going back for me. That was what I told my dad that day on Valentine's Day. I didn't even know what it meant. I thought about it and thought about it after I said it. I was like, what does that mean exactly? You've held a piece of me my whole life, and I'm coming for it. And I felt like that night, that was it. That piece of me that he held was that little me. He held my inner child. He held my chance of just growing up and having confidence and self-esteem and being what I was meant to be. And now I'm learning that, and I'm getting my emotion back. And there's so many lies we're taught. I learned to be very tough in my life. I show no emotion. I also was a wrestler. I was a pretty badass wrestler. And I learned I can handle some things. And I can flip a switch and be an alpha, take control of the situation in a flash. But that's not, I feel like that's not who I was meant to be. I was meant to be very in touch with my emotions, very intuitive. I am where I am now. And I hope to help others look at themselves and look at their programming and learn to heal. The idea that showing emotions is a sign of weakness is a lie, and it's a lie that's been perpetuated for a lot of years. You can be a respectful male with masculinity, and you can still show emotion. And yeah, I think you can have a switch. I think you can have a switch and be able to switch it off when the time's right, because there's a time for everything. There's a time when you got to be able to handle a situation. That's kind of my Valentine story. That's the day that I believe led to me. That was the first experience when I told him that. That was my first experience of choosing me and loving myself. I hope you enjoyed this podcast, and I hope to do more. Thank you for listening.